So a little background on Jeffrey. Raised in a very dysfunctional home as well. His parents constantly fought. They eventually divorced when he was a teen.
Yeah.
But there was no connection within the family. You see that with Ted's family too. No personal connection. And same thing with Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. Now Jeff began to. Now, one thing I found interesting, I was talking to you about, as a little boy, Jeff had hernia issues. He had to have 2 operations.
Okay.
I don't remember how old he was. I think he was 7 or 8. But after those operations, his parents saw something change in him. Now, I don't know if it was just going through all that pain, the medications. I don't know, but they did notice something changed in him, and he became very sullen and withdrawn after that. So I'm not sure what all that means. So then, as a teenager, he begins to drink heavily. He's literally an alcoholic when he's a young teenager.
Yes, very heavily.
And he'd go to school drunk, and the kids would make fun of him because we always like, Jeff, he's just weird, but he was funny, and he didn't really have friends. So then again, we see that whole failure to connect with people that Ted had as well. Even though he had friends and girlfriends, there was something missing. He even admitted when he had his girlfriend Liz, I'm talking about Ted, he didn't know how to open his whole heart to her. He said that in the interview. So with Jeffrey, we see the same thing. There's not a lot of friends, connections. So he had his first homosexual experience when he was 13 with a kid in the neighborhood. Okay. I think it was consensual. But he's struggling. This is the 70s. You don't just come out and say you're gay.
Right.
Okay. So he starts to get even more intense desires. Now he wants to somehow make a man completely his. He wants to have this control. So what he does, he ends up living with his grandma, and he steals a mannequin from a department store. He begins to sleep with this mannequin, take this mannequin out with him to eat, driving in the car, right? So his grandma sees this. She's like, okay, you need to leave. You just need to go. You're something weird here. So he leaves, and he gets his own place, and I think that's when he starts his murdering spree. Now, to go back a little bit, when he was still living in his parents' house while they're divorcing, why they left a teenage boy in the home alone, I don't understand.
Well, here, I mean, you probably left me alone when I was 14, but that's.
No, I mean, they literally moved out.
Well, yeah, well.
I didn't leave you that way.
But, I mean, even if you did, it's not necessarily a means to those extreme behaviors. So it's always going to be that type of mystery,
If you don't have that connection in your family, then you feel abandoned by them even more.
The isolation,
that's going to mess. Yeah. I think he was like 16 or 17 when that happened, but still, okay.
Yeah, about 17. I think I remember reading that.
Yeah. So anyway, he gets his own place, and then he starts killing folks. Well, short story. Well, long story short. He killed I think 17 young men and boys. I think that's what But, it's like his, he did go to church for a while with his grandma. He was reading the Bible. He did feel remorse killing Stephen Hicks, which was his first victim. Yeah. He was 19 and Stephen was 18. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer was 18. Yeah. So, okay, and he dissected him. I mean, right from the bat, he's just extreme. Yeah. So, he ends up killing 2 14-year-old boys, which just broke my heart. Yeah. And one little boy was naked. He ran out of his apartment. He escaped. And so women on the street were like, oh my God. So they called the police. Yeah. Listen, this little boy said some man is trying to kill him and all this kind of stuff, right? Well, the cops didn't take it serious. Jeffrey comes around and says, oh, he's my boyfriend. So
probably because of the homosexual background. That's probably what the cops kind of
the cops, they didn't want to deal with that. I do find that appalling that the police didn't care for this young boy simply because he was gay. Yeah. That's disturbing, right?
I mean, not to go off topic, but we've talked a lot about the police department, some things that I know one of our videos, just the lack of training, still to this day, that's why they still want police reform, and I do believe in it, but that's here or there, but
anyway, so Jeffrey no, this is my boyfriend. So he's like, come back to my apartment. Let me show you. So he shows them pictures he took of the young boy naked. He's like, see, we were just having sexual fun, blah, blah, blah. Now, this young man can't even talk. Why? Because Jeffrey had drilled a hole in his head.
Yeah.
So this poor little boy is bleeding. They don't think nothing about it, right?
I know.
They take him back. They believe Jeffrey. They laugh about it. Even their radio call, they're laughing about it when they're talking to dispatch, right? This little boy is back in Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey drills another hole, and eventually that kills him.
So sad.
Yeah. So anyway, Jeffrey, he did eat some of his victims. He kept their body parts in his refrigerator. He had a big drum that he kept acid, and he would put body parts in there. But there was always this intense, disgusting smell throughout the apartment building. He would say, "Oh, sorry, my freezer broke, and now the meat's all rotted," And his neighbors just thought he was a nice guy and didn't think much about it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so Jeffrey, he is found guilty. And apparently he did give his life to the Lord. He repented. Again, we don't see a lot of remorse. If you watch any of the trial footage, he's very motionless.
Very detached.
There's just nothing there. The lights are on, nobody's home, right? Well, I think he's in prison for 2 years, and then this inmate kills him. He bludgeons him to death with a dumbbell, which is interesting because Jeffrey's first kill, he killed that young man with the dumbbell.
Very interesting, yeah. Okay, I guess what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
I watched there's a very, very interesting video on YouTube. This guy, this psychoanalysis does, he reads the body language of Jeffrey Dahmer. You can find it. I don't know if he's a certified psychoanalyst, but since he's watching certain movements and things he does with his lips, his eyes, his eye contact. But I thought this was very insightful. There was he's looking into the mind, obviously the context of his crimes, and he says since Jeffrey Dahmer is no longer in society where he's able to wreak havoc the way he has, he can no longer present that kind of shock value, because that's what kind of there's that egocentric dominance in all serial killers. They have that very consistent behavior. But what's interesting is when the lady asked him about remorse, he kind of shunned it. But when she asked about specific details on certain things, he would look directly in her eyes on very grotesque, detailed things, such as I would take his bones, or I would remove the head. And when he does speak of those specific body parts and that action, he would look dead into the interviewer. And what this psychoanalysis is saying, he's looking for that shock, that dominance over someone, to get that shock value out of, because he no longer has control on the outset, because he's obviously locked up. So I thought that was very, very interesting how that mind works, and he's making eye contact with this person to see what their reaction is, because he kind of feeds off that. So look out on YouTube. It's very, very interesting.
I think I've actually heard of that. But interesting about Jeff, he was an alcoholic, so there we've got that substance
abuse. Yep.
We've got a dysfunctional family, and also he was diagnosed as, I think, bipolar and schizophrenic.
I think I've remember reading that.
Yeah, so you've got another mental illness not being treated, right? So I just found that interesting, that we see these connections with him and Ted.
Yeah, with Dahmer, like you said, there's really no remorse, even though after he's confessed to everything, just like Dennis Nader, the BTK killer, he went through all of the descriptions of every single detail, which is good, because the law enforcement needs to know the details of it so they can give some kind of closure to the families. But the way the detachment of how he's explaining these things, there's just no connection to this human being, which therapists.
And he's another example of leading that double life. He's married with a family.
Yes, he was
very involved with the church.
raised kids. He was a very he looked at as a good individual in society. He was looked at as an honoring stand-up citizen, and it's just amazing how you can keep that thing going.